I want to thank you for joining us for the second session in our series of Oracle on AWS. And today we're going to be diving in a little deep on the topic of assessing the technical feasibility of Oracle, and specifically Oracle applications on AWS. I'm Bill Saltis. I'll be your host. I'm the SVP of Alliances at Apps Associates. And today I'm joined by two expert speakers, Michael Sitt from AWS and Mihir Patel, who is our VP of Cloud Architecture. Thanks to both of you for joining me again today. In our last session, we covered licensing and compliance. And today we're going to dive, as I said, deeper into the technical feasibility and approaches for getting these Oracle applications onto AWS, even some of the most complex environments. So let me first cover some of the logistics in the agenda. Mihir, you want to pull up the agenda? While that's coming up, let me talk about the logistics. Everyone will be on mute. But if you do have questions throughout the series or throughout the session today, certainly put them in chat. Carla Roddy will be monitoring those, and we'll take questions as time's allowed at the end of today's session. We're going to first cover with Michael a little bit of why the assessment and technical feasibility approach is necessary and why AWS fits that and what we're being successful as we've gone through this journey. And then we'll turn it over to Mihir, who will talk about the whole process and approach for assessing and then moving into migration, along with how you'd get started. The other point is that the session is being recorded, so we can put this up for future playback. With that, why don't I turn it over to Michael so he can get us started for today.
Thank you, Bill. Next slide, please. Okay, so why do an assessment? An assessment, when it comes to Oracle application workloads, does a number of things for us to make sure we have a successful migration. There is a licensing component with Oracle application, and an assessment could help us figure out how do we take these on-premises licenses and take them to the public cloud. Secondarily, how do you optimize the services you're going to use at AWS? When it comes to migrating Oracle application workloads, I think sometimes I find with customers is we have to change the mindset of how we size applications on premises versus the cloud. When we move to the cloud, we need to right size the application workload, meaning let's take advantage of what cloud economics does for us and make sure that the application runs the right way in the right sizing, meaning we don't need to size that application for the occasional peak usage or some type of overhead that we think we may need. We assess the application to work out what is it that we need to handle the workload in the cloud. And that gives us a better chance of reducing the spend when we move to the cloud. With an assessment, you'll get a much more accurate total cost of ownership instead of just a as is or a like for like type of comparison. And with these assessments, I've seen the benefit of figuring out, are there any gaps, any risks with this application when we move it to the cloud? It will figure out what it is that we might not have. We may have certain things that we're running on premises. Is that reproducible in the cloud? Does the cloud give you certain inherent advantages, like in AWS, you get automatic security and high availability? This is all the things why we do an assessment. So let's talk about why AWS. Next slide, please. So we've been recognized by Gartner in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for 10 consecutive years now for cloud infrastructure as a service. And I don't put this up here to brag about it, to say, hey, we're the leaders in this space. What's important about this for 10 consecutive years, you'll see in the next slide, please. And I love this quote from Andy Jassy, which is, there is no compression algorithm for experience. AWS has been running cloud infrastructure the longest of any cloud provider. So we have that experience. And when it comes to migrating Oracle application workloads, Apps Associates have a ton of experience of doing that. And you can't reproduce that. You really have to go through it. So AWS has the deepest experience, and Apps has the deepest Oracle application migration experience. We've been doing this since 2006. We invest billions of dollars into our infrastructure every single year. And when we do that, we also increase scale. And by doing that, to date, we have actually reduced prices 85 times. At AWS, our focus is always to try to save the customer money. And how can we do that? So every time we invest in the infrastructure, drive larger scale, we pass that savings on to customers. We have the deepest platform, right? The most fully featured services. We have over 200 services, and we have millions of active customers each month. So we're not bleeding edge. We've been doing this for a long time. Now, when you migrate an Oracle application to AWS, typically it is a part of a bigger journey for the customer to the cloud. And when we look at that journey and what that looks like, the experience that Apps Associates has is something I would like to pass this on to Mihir to talk about. How do you do it? What's the methodology you do or you take advantage of to drive this to a successful migration?
Thank you, Michael. So when customers come to us to evaluate whether their Oracle platforms can run on AWS, we explain it to them as a journey, right? We're going on a trip, just like we're taking a road trip from here to New York or wherever. We got a plan. We got to pack. We got to make sure we got the right clothes packed, etc., based on where we're going. First, you have to make a checklist and make sure we packed everything and pack up a car, and then figure out what route we're going to take, and then go. Just same concept when we're going to AWS from on-prem. So the infrastructure that we're about to migrate our Oracle workloads to is some of the most secure, performant that you'll ever find in the market. As Michael mentioned, you don't have to size it for what you have today on-prem. You have to right size it. And that's the key reason for doing some of this. And then once you get there, it's not just running it on new infrastructure and we're running it in AWS. There's new innovation and new things that we can take advantage of once our Oracle workloads are running on AWS. We can introduce Internet of Things. We can integrate Redshift for analytics. There's so many services that AWS has that we can then take advantage of and integrate into our Oracle software assets that we migrated to AWS. But we got a plan for that, and it's a journey. So let's see. So most customers that come to us, they want to reduce the cost, whether it be data center costs, network, hardware, software maintenance, Oracle license costs, support costs, if you will, human resource costs, underutilization of resources, etc. They want to, at the end of the day, figure out, can I do it cheaper, better, faster in AWS than I'm doing it today? And 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, actually, yeah, you can. There are those occasional workloads that you need to keep it on-prem. It may not work. But as it relates to the Oracle stuff, pretty much everything works on AWS. It's the ancillary systems that may integrate into Oracle ERP that you may need to keep on-prem. But as it relates to the Oracle footprint and the Oracle platform itself, in terms of the ERPs and the large enterprise applications, they pretty much can run on AWS, and you get better throughput performance, etc. I've had customers say, well, we're running on an Exadata, we're running on a AIX P series with HACMP, et cetera, all these cool technologies. We're running on hyperconverged with Nutanix, and there's no way AWS is going to be cheaper and better and faster, et cetera. Our RPOs and RTOs are XYZ. And every time we've done this, we've been able to demonstrate to customers, yes, you can do it. It is cheaper. It is better. It is faster. And your licensing is in check when you move it into AWS. So it's not like, oh, you had to increase your Oracle licenses, even from AIX or VMware or any of those when you moved it to AWS. So what is the process that we use to evaluate and start our journey? Well, there's a data collection phase and a data analysis phase. So we want to do the discovery first. We want to look at the intangible stuff, architecture diagrams, any of that, SLAs, tribal knowledge, things like that the folks have. We want to understand what those are. We want to have interviews with you guys. We want to understand what you're doing, et cetera. Yeah, because your ERP is designed and built uniquely for you. Then there's automated discovery. So that in terms of how much CPUs and memory and things like that, depending on what platform you're running on, there's tools that we can leverage. There are additional tools and queries and stuff that Apps Associates has built as our journey in helping customers over the past 9 years moving Oracle enterprise workloads to AWS that we'll leverage to help in that analysis and data collection discovery phase. So once we know your business requirements, we understand what you're running and the technical requirements are, we marry those two together. And then we assess what's the ideal way to take this workload from both a business perspective as well as technical perspective and model that into AWS. We take into account licensing, performance, any compliance, any gaps that you may have from a security perspective today that you're not able to meet. We want to address those as a part of the analysis phase, and as we're mapping it into AWS and creating what we call the bill of material for AWS. And then we determine, what's the best way. If you're running on older versions of the software, do you want to upgrade those? Do you want to keep it as is? Do you want to do a lift and shift? Do you want to update those software assets as you're moving it into AWS? Do you want to retire it? Do you want to just get rid of some of this Oracle stuff, right? It's like, hey, it's old. I don't want to deal with it anymore. Or, what's your longer term approach and strategy from a business perspective? Do you want to retire this stuff over the longer period of time? So depending on the applications, the inventory, your business requirements, et cetera, will help guide you and map it for you. So let's take a little bit of a deeper view into the discovery process. So there's the tools and automation portion. So AWS has great tooling to help automate the discovery on x86 platforms to help us determine, how much memory, CPU consumption, et cetera, we're actually using. And then we map that into AWS through the tooling. And then we also do the interviews with you guys. This is a critical component, right? We need to understand your applications. What are the integration points? If there's any existing documentation, understand your business processes, SLAs. If your business is growing and you want to enhance those RPOs and RTOs, how do we do that? You might have Oracle RAC, and you might have bought it because of certain SLAs and requirements. How do you get RAC-like capabilities in AWS without having to incur the burden of Oracle RAC, right? How do we leverage CloudFormation, some of the automation that AWS provides to provision infrastructure? It's called infrastructure as a service for a reason, right? We can automate a lot of this stuff to provision massive amounts of compute. It takes us minutes, so we don't have to allocate some of that compute capacity and storage capacity. We can kind of get it on demand and pay for it as and when we need it. So we want to understand your business processes and those types of requirements. How well is your organization equipped to adopt AWS, migration readiness assessment, those types of things. We want to make sure we understand both the technical and the business requirements aspects of your environment. So once we have all of that, we use the different discovery methods, tools, and whatnot, active and passive. Then we're going to take all of that and we're going to map it to AWS, right? We're going to look at the servers and your storage, your network, your security, and we're going to figure out what is the optimal way to design this in AWS. So we're going to go from initial information gathering, then we're going to analyze that data, we're going to get your inputs, and then we're going to come up with the migration methodology. So let's walk through each one of these steps in detail. So the initial information gathering, we're going to get a lay of the land. You know, there's meetings, questionnaires, responses, understanding, you know, what servers are in scope, what applications are in scope, and then we're going to use that to size the appropriate infrastructure into AWS. So we just need to understand, you know, are we taking out an entire data center at once? Is there any timelines or compelling events that are driving this, et cetera, that we're going to get it basically a general lay of the land during the information gathering. We're just going to collect as much data, licenses, compute capacity, all of those things, right? The tools that we'll be using varies based on customer to customer. And then the metrics that those tools provide. So like for the databases on the Oracle side, if you guys have licenses for diagnostic pack, then we'll run AWR. Now AWR will leverage that for all the databases and stuff that we want to migrate that are Oracle, and we'll look at that and then use that actual data to help right-size the AWS EC2 compute environments. And we'll factor in any peak usage, load determination, any other things that maybe AWR didn't capture. But we want to look at that holistically, and then we'll right-size it in AWS. And likewise, we'll do that on the storage side and whatnot. So we're going to do the initial review of the information that's gathered. We're going to ask for all this data, and then we're going to walk through the individual components in depth, right? So we're going to look at the CPU, the storage, the network, the security, and then any specific customer requirements that you may have that your current platform architecture may not accommodate. And how do you want to improve that, enhance or improve that as you move this Oracle workload into AWS? So let's look at the CPU first. We're going to look at the current CPU usage and the CPU models. You know, are you on a AIX P series? Are you on an Exadata? Are you on an x86? How are you using the architecture and infrastructure that you have today? What are the capabilities that you have? Are you using it to do rapid provisioning of stuff, et cetera? We want to make sure that when we architect this into AWS, we're not taking a step back, but we're improving your operational capability and delivery capability when you move it to AWS. So we want to understand that. We want to understand the peak utilization. Obviously, on the database side, we'll look at it through the AWR. Application server side, we'll look at how many licenses you have, how many concurrent users you're loading onto the servers, et cetera. Then we want to size to the equivalent target instance types in AWS. Now, AWS has a plethora of EC2 instance types that we can pick from, different classes, memory optimized, storage optimized, et cetera. And based on the needs, we'll select the right ones that align with your business usage requirements, as well as your licensing. And then if there's some missing instrumentation, other things that are running on the servers, et cetera, that AWR might not pick up or OS Watcher might not pick up, et cetera, we'll ask you for that, and you know we'll evaluate that and factor that in as well. So the Amazon EC2 instances, we have numerous Linux and Windows options. We'll have x86 architectures to pick from for Oracle stuff. There's general purpose and workload optimized, as I mentioned, memory optimized, storage optimized, et cetera. And we'll pick the right ones. If your workload or your Oracle enterprise application warrants a bare metal, a physical server dedicated for you guys, we can do that. We want to look at the package and custom applications that are going to be running along with this. If we're migrating those as well, if there's Vertex or any of those things that are in play, we'll factor that in. If there's any other tooling, any other specific networking requirements that we need. We want to make sure that we factor some of those things in. We'll look at community AMIs for the Linux distributions that we can potentially leverage. We've even migrated Oracle Linux 5 or distributions into AWS. So, these are older Linux distributions, but we're able to migrate those into AWS using some community AMIs and stuff like that. And then there's numerous purchasing options on how do we save money when we buy this stuff. You can buy it on demand. You can do spot. There's savings plans. There's different ways you can provision EC2 instances on AWS and save money. So what is so EC2 instances are based on a VCPU concept. So what is a VCPU, or virtual CPU? VCPU is basically a hyper-thread on a physical core. So you have an x86 Intel chip. It's hyper-threading enabled. It's VCPU is essentially a thread on that CPU. So to get the core count, you divide the VCPU count by 2, cut it in half, right? So each core has 2 threads. So you divide it by 2 to get the number of cores. So in that link, AWS has a whole list of all the different instance families and the VCPU counts that are available. Now, just to touch on the Oracle licensing side, when Oracle asks for licensing, if you're ever in an audit with any vendor, they're going to ask you for your core counts and processor counts, et cetera. And on AWS, we go to this and we can look at those core counts and whatnot. Better yet, when you migrate your Oracle workloads to AWS, there's a free service called AWS License Manager, which you can enable. You can map your Oracle licenses to the instance types, and you can lock it down. So I encourage you guys to go look at AWS License Manager. It was covered a little bit better in the previous webinar, but I want to touch on that again. So when you migrate this, you can actually track the stuff in AWS real time. So once you have the compute EC2 instances identified in terms of what we're going to leverage for our future state, we want to look at the storage. So production has different IO requirements, throughput requirements, latency requirements. So we'll pick from the appropriate storage types, GP3, IO2 Block Express, et cetera, based on the durability and business requirements that you guys have in terms of what you guys need. And we'll pick the appropriate storage for the right workload. So we don't want to keep backups on expensive storage. We want to keep it on cheaper storage, right? So we'll look at all the different S3 storage types, et cetera. AWS has some of the most abundant, selective, if you will, choice of storage options in the market, from FSX options, NAS file system options, if you want to call it that, to block express block storage, NVMe. There's so many different types of storage types that we can pick from, and the NVMe is obviously attached to the EC2. But with the combination of those things, we're able to even take out high-end performant rack clusters with the combination of EC2 and the storage types that AWS has. So we look at your workloads, we look at the IOPS, and then we map that into the appropriate storage type. All right, so here's the broadest types of storage that AWS has, right? There's object storage, which is S3. There's block. This is predominantly what we use for Oracle database and Oracle enterprise workloads. There's file storage, EFS, which can be leveraged. There's file shares for Windows file servers. There's a new FSX file system called FSX ONTAP, if you're familiar with the NetApp family of storage products and whatnot. AWS has a native implementation of FSX ONTAP now, which just got released last week. So this portfolio of storage options increases every year, and the capabilities of what it can provide increases over time as well. And then there's numerous different ways that we can move the Oracle workloads into AWS. and these grow as well. So certain workloads, you may need to transfer it if data guard or some of those types of things aren't available to us. So we've talked about the compute in terms of EC2 instances and the storage. Now we need to look at the network. So there's two types of options that we can pick. We can do IPsec VPN tunnels into AWS, or we can do direct connect, which is a circuit that you provision and then you have to port into AWS that we can align if you want more predictable, dedicated throughput into AWS. As we're starting out our journey, there's no need for a lot of times to implement a direct circuit unless you're planning on migrating entire data center and moving everything that you have into AWS. A lot of customers typically start off with IPsec VPN tunnels in the beginning, and then they grow into better security connections, network connections, I'm sorry, into AWS as that needs arise. We have customers that run globally on IPsec VPN tunnels with no direct connect. So it just depends on what your business requirements are and what we need. So we'll look at that. We'll look at the traffic considerations, HA requirements, redundancy, and not just from a compute and infrastructure and storage, but also from a network perspective as well. So we want to analyze and understand what those are during the analysis phase and the design phase of your initiative. So security is job one. A lot of times customers are like, hey, I'm going to move this into public cloud, and I'm not sure it's secure. Some of the most secure workloads run on AWS today, and more workloads are moving to AWS than any other cloud platform. And the reason for that is security. Look at all the various tools that we have at our disposal to ensure that whatever we put into the public cloud is secure. So I had a customer who wanted to implement an iModule, iProcurement, I believe it was, and they needed a web application firewall, and they were already on AWS. Within minutes, we were able to go and provision and configure that and deploy a DMZ node with a web application firewall to support it. Literally in minutes. So we already had a dev test environment spun up in a day for them, and they were able to test and make sure. If I'm on-prem, those types of things will take time to configure and set up unless I already have the physical infrastructure available. So there's infrastructure protection options, there's data protection options, there's detection to make sure that, once we deploy our workload into AWS, is it staying secure? Are there any ports and things that indirectly got enabled that we need to, be mindful of? Somebody set up an S3 bucket and opened up the port, and now it's open to the world, et cetera. Those types of things. There's automated tooling and stuff native to the AWS platform that helps us with that. There's incident response tools. There's identity and access management and third-party integration tools. So we had a customer, they're like, hey, we're only going to allow F5 load balancers into our AWS ecosystem. If you can't deploy F5 into the AWS architecture, we can't do this. That's the other beautiful thing about AWS. Not only is AWS have these services native to their platform, but there's also an entire marketplace that we can go to meet any of the customer's security requirements, like F5, check. Cisco, check. And these are things that your networking and your security teams are already familiar with and are already interacting with, that you might already even have a license for with a lot of those things, right? That we can leverage by going to the AWS marketplace and simply integrate that right into your future architecture design. So it minimizes the impact not only on the Oracle team, if you will, the Oracle ERP teams or enterprise application teams, DBAs, those folks, but also the network and the storage and some of those folks as well, depending on what your security requirements are. And you can get enhanced monitoring capabilities as well with other types of tools, Sumo Logic and others. So once we've factored in the EC2 instance, the storage, the network, and the security requirements. We got to put all that together and figure out how we're going to migrate this stuff to AWS. So here's a high-level cloud migration methodology. We understood what the requirements are and the resource requirements are. We understood what your security requirements are. We designed that. We're going to build the cloud infrastructure with network, server, storage, et cetera. And then we'll sync that to AWS, either via data guard, or we'll use an export import, depending on if we're doing a platform migration or not. We'll sync that stuff in, and we'll do a first pass from the production source, using production as a source, and putting that into what AWS calls a VPC in AWS. And then we migrate that and we iterate through that. We do it. Some customers just need 2 iterations before we cut over and go live. Some customers need 3. It just depends on what all we're doing, right? The more changes, if we're upgrading the database and the application stack as a part of the migration, if we're modernizing it, if you will, getting current on it, then we might need an extra one. If we're just doing a lift and shift, then maybe 2 instances are 2 iterations of the migration are sufficient. It just varies. Sometimes we're going to increase their RPOs and RTOs. We're going to give them a DR environment. So we need DR environment built, et cetera. So the number of iterations that we do, migration passes we do, depends on the discovery that we did as part of the assessment. We test it, and we test it in the future production target VPC, if you will, so that we can figure out and fix any of those issues when we beforehand. And then in AWS with the native capabilities, we just clone it using snapshots and stuff, and we literally just copy and snap it into dev test environment. So we want to make sure production is live, operational, fixed, secure, locked down. All the appropriate ports are open for bank interfaces or any third-party integrations or other interfaces, and all those things. And then we want to make sure that we test that, and then we'll migrate it and test it again, and then we'll do the cutover. So at a high level, that's the process that we use. Now this slide is kind of talking about Oracle E-Business Suite. If it's on-prem, it's production, and we're going to do is we're going to migrate that into the production environment first into AWS, and then from there we're going to clone it into dev and test down. So it kind of goes backwards, if you will. Instead of building dev and test and then prod, we build everything in prod, make sure prod's right, secure, timings, all that stuff gets nailed, and then we clone it back down into the dev and test environments in AWS. So the question is, hey, Mahir, are we going to be the first people to migrate our large Oracle enterprise workloads, specifically E-Business Suite or Hyperion or OBIE, et cetera, into AWS? And the answer is no. Here's some 2 representative customers that we've done, Intuit and Pearson. Now, these guys were both managed by Oracle at Oracle on what Oracle service called Oracle Managed Cloud Services. And they were running on Oracle Exadata with Exadata and RAC, Oracle RAC. And both of these customers are like, we need to, instead of renewing our contract with OMCS, we need you, Apps Associates, to move us into AWS, make sure that there's no issues with us getting rid of RAC. We want RAC-like, but we don't need Oracle RAC in AWS. But our RPOs and RTOs are still pretty tight. So, as long as you can get it to us within, 10, 15 minutes in the event of a DR, we're happy. So we're able to do that with these customers. They're pretty large. So let's talk about Intuit, right? So they're they do my taxes, right? Quicken, et cetera. They sold that off, but they do pretty much our taxes, TurboTax and whatnot. They were on OMCS, they were running 12.1.3, now it's being upgraded to 12.2. But when we moved them, they did a migration of 12.1.3 with 11.204 straight into AWS. It's 32 terabytes on the Oracle E-Business Suite side. There were 3-node rack on Exadata with active data guard and automated failover and everything. They had a monthly restacking. So every month, a new security, the OS team releases a new security OS image that has to get adopted by every team into it. So we had to be able to support that and not impact the business. So how do you do that? How did we do that? We did that through CloudFormation scripting. So we can automate that new AMI that the security team releases to the environment that's hardened, and support that with the Oracle ERP systems. And then we did some extensive performance tuning coming off of Exadata. Pearson, similar e-business suite, but they were already on 12.2, but they had not just e-business suite, like take e-business suite, take our Hyperion, OBIEE, ASEP, MDM, Oracle, identity management, etc., all of it, and the other third Kofax imaging system, all these things. Take our entire ERP platform ecosystem and move it to AWS. So there were about 400 servers, 30,000 users globally. Again, they were on an Oracle RAC Exadata system. We retired that. And the Oracle ERP system, the core, the heart of all of this was around 18 terabytes. And to date, I think it's still the largest known migration of Oracle application set to AWS at once, if you will. And they are a managed services customer. So after we moved them, we were able to support them because they're like, hey, thanks for taking us to AWS. Thanks for helping us save all this money. But, we're just learning how to drive. Can you drive for us? And we'll be the passenger on this journey. We said, sure. So even today, we're helping them on their journey in adopting AWS. So the journey hasn't stopped just because their Oracle platforms are migrated. We're still modernizing, enhancing, and delivering new business capabilities as a result of them being on AWS. And on that note, I'll open it up for questions.
Here, as we open it up to questions, please feel free, everyone, to put your questions into chat, and Carla will be gathering those. If we can go to the next slide, I just want to invite all of you to reach out. Michael and Mihir have done a great job of simplifying and helping you determine what's involved with an approach to feasibility as well as migration. But you can also contact us simply by emailing us at contact@Apps Associates, or just using the link that's at the bottom right of this page. That will take you to a forum where you can say, hey, how do I get started with this? And the important thing here is not only the experience we talked about earlier, of course, we'll bring that, but AWS has partnered with us and has funding programs available that could fully fund this, depending on scope, depending on qualifying factors, which we work through with you. So AWS is more than willing to step up and help you get started and help us help you. So with that, let me thank all of you for joining, but turn it over to Carla and see which questions have come in.
Thanks, Bill. We do have a few that have come in. And the first one is, do you handle e-business suite as well as PeopleSoft?
Yes.
Okay,
Any of the Oracle applications that run on-prem can work in AWS. In fact, do work in AWS. And oftentimes, depending on how old your hardware is, et cetera, run faster. So even if you look at those Exadata rack environments at Pearson and Intuit that we took out, their close cycles and things were actually even faster on AWS than they were on that Exa platform. That's not me saying that, that's factual data, et cetera, that their CTO came back and said this was the smoothest, fastest close we've had. And that's after moving to AWS. So.
Okay, great. And what about JDE?
We don't do JDE, but we do all the other Oracle apps.
Okay, great. And then as most organizations address their cloud strategy, what are the most common concerns and objections that you're hearing?
I'll have my answers. Michael, you wanna see, I'll let you go first on this, and in terms of what you hear, but I know what I hear. I'm happy to share mine. You want to go
I
first?
mean, I can chime in. With Oracle workloads, one of the concerns is licensing and how do you translate that from an on-premise environment to the cloud? That's one. The other ones, in terms of objections, is the concern about supportability. Because Oracle is out there saying, hey, we're not going to support this if you move it to AWS, which factually is not true. And those are the biggest ones I hear.
Yeah, I mean, I hear those, and the other one I hear is around security. But so licensing, supportability, and security are the three that I hear. But none of those are true. I mean, if you look at just look at Pearson and Intuit, right? They were running at Oracle in their hosting service called Oracle Managed Cloud Services, and Oracle told them it'll never work, it'll fail because you're running on Exadata, et cetera. It won't, you're not going to be successful moving into AWS, you're going to regret it, et cetera, right? To the executives teams there. And, we did it. It runs, they're running live. I mean, they've been live for Pearson over a year. And, Intuit, I think, it's September. So yeah, both of them over a year. And they're both very successful, very happy, and running better. And the licensing's in check because, again, we evaluated that as a part of the analysis, and then they have other licensing agreements and stuff. And Oracle's never told them, oh, we're not going to, obviously we're supporting Pearson, for instance, right? We've had issues. We log a service request with Oracle, and Oracle's never said, oh, we're not going to help you because you're running on AWS. It's never happened. Not with Pearson, not with any of the 300 plus customers that we've helped that move to AWS.
Okay, great. Thanks. Question for you, Mahir. How long does a migration take?
Yeah, so depending on, let's just say Oracle Core ERP, anywhere from 4 to 6 months. And that's a typical range. So if we're just moving it as is, then closer to the 4-month range. If you're like, hey, no, upgrade me to the latest and greatest, to 12.2 and upgrade the database and this, then it could take upwards of 6 months. But within 4 to 6 months is definitely doable.
Okay, great. And then Michael, question for you. Are there a lot of eBusiness Suites applications running on AWS?
Okay, as a policy, we don't reveal specifics, but I can tell you that it's in the hundreds, and the majority of those were migrated by Apps Associates.
Great, thank you. Mihir, I think this one's for you in terms of, do you handle customizations with Oracle applications?
Absolutely. So as a part of the assessment, the analysis phase, we've built a couple of tools. One of them is called Bloodhound, that'll inventory all your customizations, Chemleys, Rice, whatever we want to call them. And then we also have other sets of tools that we've developed through the years that help us understand what things do I need to change or modify as a result of us changing a platform. I don't know what you're on, if you're on AIX, Solaris, or even an x86. If I'm changing it from where I am today to the new hardware, what could break, right? If I have a file system name that's going to change, et cetera, there's customizations that are going to break. We have tools to help during the assessment to identify specifically which customizations will potentially have an impact.
Okay, great. And then there's one more that came in terms of the managed services. Do you do managed services of EBS and PeopleSoft? And then it says env.s ?
Yeah, so we can do full managed services across the entire AWS platform if you want, because we are a MSP with AWS and AWS audit sets. So if you need help with us, like, hey, just manage the air quotes cloud data center for me in AWS, we can do that. And we can manage the full stack apps, database, patching, maintenance, login service requests with Oracle on your behalf, proactive management, maintenance, care and feeding of those apps for you. We do as a part of our managed services that we call infrastructure managed services. And that's purely on a platform technology, et cetera, DBAs, apps DBAs, storage, all that stuff, right? And then on the flip side of that, we also have application managed services, AMS. If you need application functional support, hey, I'm trying to close the books and GL's not working properly, or payables transfer to GL concurrent programs not doing what I needed to do functionally, right? Is the setup wrong or this, that, or the other? AMS team will help with that. In conjunction with that, we also have another tool. It's called Watchdog, and you can find all these tools on our website, Bloodhound and Watchdog. On our website. So think of Watchdog as OnStar for Oracle ERP. So it's like a red, yellow, green dashboard that'll pop up that you'll be able to see, hey, am I paying my invoices too early? To have stuff that's shipped but not invoiced, what are my tolerances on my payables? Those the whole slew of things across the entire application suite, from HR to GL to payables to AR, everything. So it's think of it as OnStar for Oracle eBusiness Suites. We also have those tools as well that come as a part of our application managed services.
Great, thank you so much. That was our last question. So Bill, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks again, Michael and Mihir. Great session. Again, all of you, thanks for joining us today, and look forward for our next Oracle on AWS session. Thank you. Have a great day.